Prompt engineering is a 2024 solution to a 2026 problem. We have been told that if we just find the right words, the AI will suddenly perform like a senior partner. But in reality, a prompt is just a surface-level request hitting a deep-level mess. Most organizations are treating Copilot like a magic wand right now. They think the thinking step-by-step trick is a real strategy, but it is actually just a band-aid. Because if your data is a chaotic wreck of unmapped files, no amount of clever phrasing will save the output. You are essentially asking a genius to search through a dumpster. We are moving away from the era of improvisation. The days of individual prompt hacks are ending because they simply do not scale. The future isn't about how well you talk to the machine, but rather how well you architect the system behind it. We are entering the era of orchestration. The structural rot, why context collapses. You've likely seen the demo where Copilot summarizes a meeting perfectly. It looks like magic in the video. But when you try it in your own tenant, it misses the point entirely, or it pulls data from 3 years ago. This isn't an AI failure, it is structural rot. The first failure mode is what I call context collapse. It happens because of Teams and SharePoint sprawl. In most organizations, work is scattered across too many places. You have a chat in Teams, a loop component for brainstorming, and a SharePoint site for the final policy. But the moment those three things diverge, the AI loses the source of truth. You ask the same question twice and get two different answers because the context is fragmented. Copilot is essentially guessing which version of truth you want today. If the chat says one thing and the document says another, the system breaks. It cannot reconcile the conflict because there is no hierarchy in your data. The second failure is the misscoped policy. This is where trust goes to die. I see two extremes here. First, there is the over-restrictive approach. IT gets nervous and they lock everything down. They apply purview labels to every single folder. And then the coworker becomes useless. You ask Copilot for a summary of the project and it says it can't find any files. You've successfully secured your data, but you've also lobotomized your AI. It has no RAM to work with. The other extreme is under-restrictive. You have open-to-everyone links floating around from 2019. This leads to catastrophic data leaks, not because a hacker got in, but because the AI was too helpful. It found a spreadsheet of executive salaries that someone left in a public folder 5 years ago. The moment that happens, trust collapses, and once trust is gone, adoption stops. The third failure is orphaned knowledge. This is the most dangerous one for your decision-making. Think about how many duplicate files live in your OneDrive. Draft v1, draft final, and draft final v2 Mirko. To a human, we know the date modified matters, but to a large language model, stale data is often treated with the same authority as yesterday's meeting notes. Copilot doesn't know that the 2022 strategy is obsolete if it's still sitting in a high-traffic SharePoint site. It sees the keywords and the relevance, so it includes it in the summary. This makes the AI a hallucination amplifier. It isn't making things up out of thin air, it is just pulling from a reality that no longer exists. Stale data is actually worse than no data. If the AI finds nothing, you go look for it yourself. But if the AI finds the wrong thing and presents it confidently, you make a bad decision. We have built hierarchies for a world that no longer exists. We built them for people who navigate folders. But Copilot doesn't navigate, it retrieves. And retrieval requires a different kind of integrity. It requires a substrate that is clean, mapped, and governed. If you don't fix the rot, the prompt doesn't matter. You are essentially trying to build a skyscraper on a swamp. You can buy the most expensive glass for the windows, but the building is still going to sink. Most organizations are currently obsessed with the glass. They are training people on how to write better prompts and making cheat sheets for the interface. But the interface is just the tip of the iceberg. The real work, the hard work, is underneath. It is about moving from a pile of unmapped files to a rigid semantic index. It is about ensuring that when the AI reaches for a fact, it finds a single, high-fidelity signal. Because in reality, work doesn't start with navigation anymore. It starts with context. And if that context is broken, your AI coworker is just another source of noise in an already loud room. We need a new model. We need to move beyond the conversation. We need to start building the decision lattice, replacing the prompt with the decision lattice. We have to stop thinking about prompts as the primary lever for AI success, because a prompt is just a conversation. It is essentially a request for a favor, but you don't run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise on favors and casual chats. You run it on systems. That is why we are moving away from the chat box mentality and toward what I call the decision lattice. A lattice isn't a conversation, but rather a structured and multidimensional framework where every single output is supported by defined and verified inputs. It marks the move from individual improvisation to corporate orchestration. In the old model, you simply hoped the employee knew how to ask the right question. In the lattice model, the system is designed so the right answer is the only logical outcome. Think of this lattice in 4 distinct layers, and keep in mind that if you miss even one, the whole structure of trust falls apart. Layer 1 is the signals. These are the raw feeds. We are talking about the emails, the meeting transcripts, and the continuous data streams that flow through your tenant every second. Most people think this is the data, but in reality, it is actually just noise until it is caught. In a decision lattice, you don't just let these signals float around. You identify which ones are high fidelity and you decide which streams actually matter for the business outcome you are trying to reach. Layer 2 is where the magic happens, and we call this the context layer. This isn't just all of SharePoint, which is a guaranteed recipe for a hallucination. This is about curated libraries and specifically configured graph connectors. You are creating a digital boundary and telling the AI to look here and only here when you ask about the Q3 budget. You are essentially creating a walled garden of truth. By using graph connectors to bring in external data from your CRM or a legacy SQL database, you are grounding the AI in a reality that spans far beyond just a few Word documents. Layer 3 is the decision node, and this is where Copilot actually sits. But in this model, Copilot isn't just thinking on its own. It is applying a specific set of logic and rules to the refined context you provided in Layer 2. This is where you embed your corporate SOPs. This is where the prompt actually lives, but it is no longer a standalone sentence. It is a set of instructions that tells the system to take the signals from Layer 1, filter them by the context in Layer 2, and apply your standard risk assessment logic to generate a result. The decision node is the engine, but the lattice is the fuel system and the steering. Layer 4 is the action, which is the final and governed output. Because you have controlled the inputs and the logic, you can actually trust what comes out of the machine. It might be a report, a recommendation, or a drafted email to a client. But unlike a random chat response, this action is fully auditable. You can trace it back through the lattice to see exactly which signal and which context piece created that specific sentence. The shift here is fundamental because prompting is ad hoc and individual. It relies on the person sitting at the desk having a good day and remembering to include the right details in their message. The decision lattice is structured and shared. It is a piece of organizational infrastructure. When you build a lattice for an executive decision brief, it doesn't matter who triggers the request because the logic is the same, the sources are the same, and the level of trust is the same. We are essentially building a machine for thinking. We are moving from a world where we use AI to a world where we architect AI. This is how you scale. You cannot scale 1,000 different people writing 1,000 different prompts. You can, however, scale 10 well-designed lattices that handle 10 core business processes. Because at the end of the day, your board doesn't care if your employees are good at prompting. They care if the decisions being made are accurate, fast, and secure. The lattice gives you that certainty. It turns the black box of AI into a transparent and governed pipeline. You aren't just talking to a machine anymore, you are designing the way your company thinks, and that starts by realizing the prompt is just the smallest part of the system. Anchoring the architecture beyond the interface. If you want to understand why your current AI pilot feels like a series of disconnected toys, you have to look at the interface. Copilot is a beautiful front door. It is designed to be inviting, and it is built to make you feel like you are having a human conversation. But a front door is not a house. If you focus only on the chat bubble, you are missing the entire foundation that actually makes the machine work. The real work, which is the heavy lifting of enterprise intelligence, happens in the substrate. You aren't just using an app when you trigger a request. You are orchestrating a massive and interconnected stack of Microsoft services that must fire in perfect synchronicity to give you a single accurate sentence. Think of Microsoft Graph and its connectors as the central nervous system of this architecture. They are the pipes. Without them, the AI is effectively blind. It is just a model with a high IQ but zero local memory. When you ask a question, the graph doesn't just search for a file. It maps the relationship between you, your manager, the 3 meetings you had this morning, and the specific version of the project plan you edited at midnight. Graph connectors are the bridge to your external world. They pull in data from Jira, Salesforce, or your custom SQL servers so the AI stops guessing and starts knowing. If these pipes are clogged or unmapped, the coworker is just a stranger in your office with no access to the filing cabinet. Then we have Microsoft Purview, which serves as the filter. In the old world, security was about who could open a specific folder. In the AI world, security is about what the model is allowed to learn from. Purview is the silent governor that defines the boundaries of the AI's imagination. It tells Copilot what it is allowed to know and, more importantly, what it must absolutely ignore. When you apply a sensitivity label, you aren't just tagging a document for compliance. You are essentially creating a no-fly zone for the LLM. If your Purview labels are a mess, your AI's internal map is a mess. You cannot have a trustable coworker if the system doesn't have a rigid set of ethical and legal guardrails built directly into the retrieval flow. But even with the right data and the right filters, the system needs to know who is asking. That is Microsoft Entra ID. Identity is the ultimate context. A CEO asking for a summary of personnel changes should get a vastly different response than a junior manager asking the same thing. Entra ID provides the role-based reality that shapes the output. The AI doesn't just see a prompt, it sees a set of permissions, a department, and a history of access. If your identity management is sloppy and people have privilege creep from 3 jobs ago, Copilot will inadvertently become the world's most efficient internal spy. It will surface exactly what those people shouldn't see because you told the system they were allowed to see it. To prevent the chaos of raw files from poisoning the model, we use Microsoft Fabric and OneLake. This is your structured data layer. Most companies are trying to feed Copilot a diet of messy Excel trackers and random CSV exports. That is how you get hallucinations. One lake acts as the single and unified logical lake for all your data. It organizes the Excel chaos into a format the AI can actually digest without getting confused by formatting errors or broken links. It turns your raw numbers into a refined product. Finally, there is Copilot Studio. This is the workbench. This is where you actually build the decision boundaries. You don't just hope the AI follows your rules. You embed the logic here. You define the specific topics, the external actions, and the multi-step workflows that move beyond a simple chat. You are designing the brain of the specific coworker you want to hire. When you realize that Copilot is just the interface for this entire stack, your strategy changes. You stop training people on how to type and start training your architects on how to build. You aren't buying a tool, you are designing a digital employee, and that employee is only as smart as the architecture you provide. The concrete walkthrough, the executive decision brief, to move this from a conceptual framework into a tangible reality. Let's walk through a specific high-stakes scenario. We are going to build an automated executive decision brief. This is the moment where theory meets the ground. In most companies today, preparing for a board meeting or a major pivot involves a week of manual labor. You have analysts hunting for the latest sales figures, managers digging through email threads to find the real reason a project stalled, and executives trying to reconcile 3 different versions of a slide deck. It is a process defined by friction. But when we apply the architecture we've discussed, the prompt becomes the smallest and least important part of the entire operation. Phase 1 is the input. We aren't just opening a chat box and asking what happened this month. That is a low-fidelity request that invites a low-fidelity answer. Instead, we point our decision lattice at specific graph-connected sources. We define the boundary. We tell the system to pull the raw financial data from Microsoft Fabric, the project milestones from a specific SharePoint library, and the sentiment analysis from the last 4 leadership town halls via Teams transcripts. We are essentially giving the AI a specific curated map of the territory. We aren't asking it to find the truth, we are providing the truth and asking it to synthesize it. Next comes the orchestration. This happens inside Copilot Studio. This is where you move from a conversation to a transformation. We define the logic. We aren't relying on the AI's general intelligence to decide what an executive needs to know. We build a workflow that says, identify any project where the spend is 10% over budget. Cross-reference that with the risk register in our external SQL database, and highlight the specific manager responsible. This isn't a prompt. It is a set of rigid architectural instructions. The AI is acting as a processor, not a creator. It is taking the raw signals and running them through your corporate filter to create a recommendation. But the most critical step is the validation, before a single word reaches the executive's screen. The system performs an automated compliance check. It uses Microsoft Purview to scan the draft for any sensitive data that doesn't belong in this specific brief. If a project name is mentioned that is still under a strict NDA, or if a specific salary figure was accidentally pulled from a raw spreadsheet, the system flags it. It doesn't just generate content, it governs it in real time. This is how you solve the trust gap. You aren't hoping the AI is safe. You are ensuring it is safe through a series of programmatic checks and balances. The final output is a high-fidelity report. It isn't a generic summary that requires a 3-hour human rewrite to make it useful, because you controlled the inputs and defined the logic. The result is a precise, actionable document. It looks like it was written by a senior partner who has been with the company for a decade. It understands the context, it respects the boundaries, and it focuses on the metrics that actually drive the business forward. This is the difference between a cool demo and an enterprise-grade coworker. In the demo, you ask a question and get a paragraph. In the enterprise architecture, you design a system and get a decision. When you look at this walkthrough, you realize that the person triggering the brief didn't need to be a prompt engineer. They didn't need a list of magic keywords. They just needed to click a button that triggered a pre-designed lattice. The architecture did the work, the graph provided the memory, Purview provided the safety, Fabric provided the structure, and Copilot provided the voice. This is how you move beyond the hype. You stop treating AI as a search engine and start treating it as a specialized factory for intelligence. You are no longer just chatting with a bot. You are running a sophisticated automated pipeline that turns raw organizational noise into clear executive signal. And that shift only happens when you stop obsessing over the words in the box and start designing the pipes behind the wall. This is the coworker architecture. This is how work actually changes. Measuring success, decision confidence, speed. How do you actually prove that any of this is working? If you go to your board and talk about improved AI engagement or total number of prompts sent, you are going to lose them. They have heard about AI potential for 3 years. They are tired of hearing that the technology is revolutionary. They want to know if the investment is actually moving the needle on the bottom line. To answer that, we have to stop measuring how people talk to the machine and start measuring the velocity of the outcome. We need a new metric. I call it decision confidence speed. This is the only number that truly matters in a post-prompting world. It is the measurement of the time it takes for a team to reach a committed, final action that they do not need to revisit. In most organizations, speed is an illusion. You might get a first draft in 30 seconds, but if that draft requires 4 hours of human fact-checking and 3 meetings to fix the hallucinations, you haven't actually gained anything. You've just shifted the labor from writing to editing. Decision confidence speed tracks the entire journey from the initial signal to the final sign-off. To track this effectively, we look at 3 specific pillars. The first is time to decision. This is the raw duration between the moment a business need is identified and the moment a final approved action is taken. In the old model of unmapped data, this process is plagued by research. People spend half their time just trying to find the right version of a file. In a structured decision lattice, that search time drops to 0. The system already knows where the truth is. We aren't measuring how fast the AI types. We are measuring how much of the human middle we can eliminate. If your architecture is sound, you should see the gap between a request and a resolution shrink by half because the trust-building phase is automated. The second pillar is the rework rate. This is the percentage of AI outputs that require a human to intervene and fix a factual error or a logic flaw. This is the ultimate test of your semantic index. If your rework rate is high, your architecture is failing. It means your context is too broad, your data is stale, or your purview labels are letting noise into the signal. A successful implementation doesn't just make people faster, it makes them more accurate. We want to see a downward trend here. When the rework rate hits near 0, you have achieved an enterprise-grade coworker. You've moved from AI as a toy to AI as a reliable infrastructure. The third pillar is the exception count. This is the most technical of the 3, but it is vital for IT and compliance. We track how often the AI tries to access data it shouldn't, which purview blocks, or how often it fails to find the data it needs because of a broken graph connector. High exception counts indicate a friction-heavy architecture. It means your digital boundaries are poorly defined. By monitoring these exceptions, you can fine-tune your lattice in real time. You are essentially debugging your company's intelligence. When you present these metrics, you change the conversation. You are no longer talking about cool tools. You are talking about operational efficiency. A successful architecture usually yields a 20 to 40% reduction in total decision time within the first month. That isn't just a productivity gain, it is a competitive advantage. It means your company can pivot faster, respond to market changes quicker, and execute with more certainty than anyone else. Efficiency isn't about typing more words into a chat box. It is about needing to type less often because the system already understands the goal. The 30-day proof plan. If this feels overwhelming, remember that you don't have to boil the ocean on day 1. Architecture is built in stages. You can prove this model in exactly 30 days if you stay disciplined about the scope. During weeks 1 and 2, your only job is to baseline the chaos. Don't change anything yet. Pick one messy, frequent workflow, something like a weekly project status report or a vendor risk assessment. Measure the current time to decision, count the rework loops, document every single time someone asks if they have the right version of the spreadsheet. This data is your leverage because it shows the board exactly what your architectural debt costs in hours and frustration. In week 3, you introduce the decision lattice. You don't do it for the whole company. You do it for that one specific workflow. Define your approved data sources in SharePoint. Clear out the stale duplicates, and map your external signals through a graph connector. Set the logic in Copilot Studio. You are creating a pod of truth for this one task. By week 4, you run the comparison. You let the team use the lattice instead of the raw chat box. And that's when you'll watch the "can we trust this?" conversations simply disappear. The rework rate will plummet because the AI is finally grounded in a rigid, verified reality. At the end of the month, you take those 3 metrics: time to decision, rework rate, and exception count, and you show the board the difference. Start small, but always build with the final architecture in mind. Every library you clean and every connector you map is a brick in the foundation of your future agency. If this shift from prompting to architecture changed how you think about AI, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn. I spend my time diagnosing these systems so you can stop guessing and start building. Subscribe to the M365 FM podcast for more deep dives into the structural reality of the modern workplace. Share this with your team, especially if you're currently drowning in the perfect prompt trap. Once you fix the foundation, your AI stops being a chatbot and starts being a coworker. For the advanced walkthrough on graph connectors, check out this video next. Subscribe for more.